Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Beth, for the introduction. I wanted to also recognize Sherry. I forgot to mention that in my education report about how much work is going on behind the scenes with both Beth and Sherry. So if we could give them a round of applause, please. They're the brains behind the operation. And then wanted to call up Brian Idle from Peacock and Lewis. Thank you, Brian, for all your support with the chapter.
Well, good morning, and as Rob mentioned, I am Brian Idle, the proud CEO of Peacock and Lewis, a 63-year-old master planning, architecture, and interior design firm founded in West Palm Beach, Florida, and office in Naples. And Beth and Sherry, you always put us in the best places for our summer get-togethers. I'm very excited to be here with all of you. It's that 14 years of consistency and continuity of excellence that really defines who we are here at the Florida CMAA. As your platinum sponsor, it's interesting, when this program first started almost 20 years ago, how time flies, they were striving at that time to have one representative in each of the categories. You know, the platinum, the diamond, the ruby, the emerald, silver, and gold. How many did I count on that list today? I think there's 38 some corporate partners that you have today. Another testament to the chapter. And if you take a moment and explore why it's appropriate for Peacock and Lewis and FLCMAA to be partners, it's been both beneficial to us and transformative. It makes perfect sense because our firm and FLCMAA always strive to be the best. And we've achieved it, you've achieved it, and it's been through that partnership and relationship that has given us the insights to do the best possible projects for you. As club managers, your dedication to ensuring welcoming and inspiring club environments aligns with our goals of designing functional, inspirational, and aesthetically pleasing spaces. By sponsoring FLCMAA, we gain valuable insights to what the needs of your members are, and each one of your clubs are unique. And it's our challenge each time out that we engage with a club to build on your strengths, find out what is unique about you and how you want to set yourself apart from the competition. So it's a challenge. I mean, between North Palm Beach and Naples, we're serving probably 300 to 350 private clubs in the state of Florida. In return for this partnership, it provides you the access to cutting-edge thought and design because in our 63 years, we've done over 2,000 club and hospitality projects. Many of you know that we were the partners at the Breakers in Palm Beach for 25 years, and they kept us busy with over $500 million in projects over that 25-year period. It also signifies our commitment to the industry, and especially in Florida, it demonstrates that we're more than just a service provider, but a genuine partner invested in your success. As Beth and Michael pointed out, on a practical level, the financial support that we give you significantly impacts the chapter's activities, the locations where you get to have your summer conferences, and the high-quality education and training that you get to foster a stronger club leader community. However, our partnership in FLCMA is more than just financial. It's the relationships that we form and the friendships that we form. It was mentioned earlier today. This is a special group of people, the Florida chapter. It continues to grow. The family continues to grow, and now I'm part of the senior class with the thinning hair and what's left is gray. But it's great to see so many new young members coming into the chapter and developing those strong we're all one family. So some exciting news for Peacock and Lewis and for you. When I first started at Peacock and Lewis nearly 40 years ago now, it was my dream to have an integrated service level that would provide seamless opportunity for excellence to my clients. Well, it took me 40 years to do it, but in January we just started another division within our firm called Peacock and Lewis Engineering. And it was one of your colleagues that came to me after a project and they said, Brian, as soon as you can add engineering in-house, it's going to be a far better project for us during the process and after the process. Took it to heart, made it a priority, and today our engineers, we have a team of 5 and we're growing. They're going through Peacock and Lewis University. They're sitting arm in arm with our architects and interior designers. And just like concierge medicine, they no longer have to focus on 40 different building types, working with 20 or up to 200 architects on many different project types. Their only focus are club amenities. We are going to teach them what is important to you when designing a display kitchen or having nano walls in your building, understanding what negative pressure is and what makes the best environments from a mechanical perspective. So we have mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, plumbing engineering, and fire protection now under our umbrella. At Peacock and Lewis, our engineers are literally in the room, and you can imagine how the continuity and consistency within a project and delivering it on time for your project is going to pay benefits. By combining the technical expertise and real-time coordination with a deep understanding of what your club environments are all about, Peacock and Lewis Engineering contributes to the success of your club projects with innovative and lasting solutions exceeding your expectations. Now we look forward to serving you both, well, from a master planning perspective, architecture, interior design, and now engineering. So please stop by our booth, pick up, what are we giving away this year? Coolers? No lily bags, no pashminas, no Tervis tumblers. We're doing coolers this year. Stop by and say hi to our representatives. We are now a firm of 40, and we have with us Mary, who you all know very well. There's Mary. Stand up and say hi to Mary. Unfortunately for Peacock and Lewis, we just had Mary's retirement party on Friday night. And I can't tell you the number of people that continually tell me, Brian, I don't know who it is that answers your phone or greets me when I come through that door, but never, ever allow her to leave. We didn't do it. Mary's going to sail off into the sunset. But she's going to give us through this end of the month to make the transition. Also with us, Ken Hart and Patricia Sampson, our directors in the Naples office. Are you, there's Patricia, Ken, there you are. And serving the west coast of Florida. And then Henry Wallmeyer is here also, our COO. Henry, stand up and be recognized. So give us a shot, give us an opportunity, and you'll be among, again, those 2,000 projects that we've successfully completed, and we'll be happy to give a presentation to your board, again, to make a great relationship with your club. So now it's my pleasure to be able to introduce a very interesting man, Sebastian Junger. I have a special appreciation of what Sebastian has done in his career. My daughter was in journalism and kind of dedicated her life to journalism. And I was telling Sebastian that being in front of the camera at 5 in the morning at a murder scene, it always puts people in danger to bring the story to the public. And Sebastian did it in the trenches, figuratively and literally, as a war correspondent. And I don't know if many of you are not my age, but I grew up around the family dining room table listening to the statistics of what was happening in the Vietnam War. And it was that connection through war correspondence that gave us, what was really going on in that foreign land. Sebastian has traveled the world. He's taken a lot of his experiences on the battlefield and created some, bestsellers and very compelling movies. War, The Perfect Storm, A Death in Belmont, and Fire. He also, the documentary films Restrepo and Korengal, The Valley of Death in Afghanistan. If you were assigned to go to Korengal, chances are you weren't coming back. Sebastian has great insights into all of this. He became a fixture in the international media scene as a first-time author. He commanded New York bestsellers, The Perfect Storm, which as many of you have seen many times with Mark Wahlberg and George Clooney. His latest work is very compelling, In the Time of Dying, and you all have a copy of the book. I would encourage you, after this time that you get to spend with Sebastian, come and meet him. Shake his hand, ask a few questions, get your book signed. He'll be in our booth following the presentation today. What we're going to do now is Dominic Giarantano from Private Club Films has put together a short film so you can get to understand the man a little better. And then Dominic and Sebastian are going to come up on stage and have a chat. Following that, it'll be open to your Q&A. Thank you again for all of your support of our firm, and we are just thrilled to be among such an esteemed group of people. Thank you.
This is the southern Korengal.
Deadliest place on earth, the Korengal Valley.
We're not ready for this.
Over here!
Fear is always there.
We're gonna die here.
We were stopped at a rebel checkpoint, like 50-50, they're gonna shoot all of us.
The four of us would set out from Washington, D.C. and walk north, so we would have to move fast. We would have a 300-mile conversation about war.
There was nothing to hide behind.
About what it does to you, and about why you miss it.
Let's welcome Sebastian here this morning. Certainly starting off the conference on a high note, and as I was kind of preparing for the Q&A session, there's a lot of personal experience in what Sebastian has gone through and what we're going to talk about here today that will tie back to the industry for sure, but I think probably more about stress and life experience and life and death. And so maybe let's just start from the top about a little bit more of your background that isn't in that bio.
Yeah, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. So I grew up in a very safe suburb of Boston in the 60s and 70s. And as a young man, as a teenager, I just had this sort of like feeling like if I weren't tested in some way, if I weren't in situations that I didn't know I could survive, that something would be missing in my maturing process, that I wouldn't, in the way that I termed it back then, I wouldn't become a man. How do you become a man? How do you become an adult without being tested in some way? And for hundreds of thousands of years, young people have been tested and passed the threshold into adulthood. And I didn't know how to do that in Belmont, Massachusetts. And my father was from Europe. He was a refugee from 2 wars. I was very enamored of the Native Americans, and I was like, what do I got to do? So I wound up very intentionally uncoupling from that kind of society. And after I got out of college, I studied anthropology, and I worked as a climber for tree companies. So I did all the aerial work, 80, 90, 100 feet in the air on a line with a chainsaw, taking trees down in sections in a small space, obviously very dangerous. It's dangerous if you make a mistake. If you don't make a mistake, you're really just dealing with physics. And if you don't make a mistake, it's physics. Everything's predictable. So I had this idea that I have agency and I can survive this because I'm not going to make a mistake. Of course, I eventually did. I cut my leg with the chainsaw. And that gave me the idea of writing about dangerous jobs. And that wound up what I envisioned as the first chapter in a book on dangerous jobs wound up as The Perfect Storm. And then eventually I wound up working as a war reporter overseas, and between books, I would go overseas and report mostly on wars, and incredibly meaningful, both wars that the US was involved in and lots that we weren't. In the civil wars in West Africa, I was in Afghanistan starting in 1996. Extraordinary experiences for me.
Maybe let's just kind of start a little bit more at the top. Kind of rolled through the chainsaw accident where you nearly cut off your leg. Maybe just how that spurred into dangerous jobs, where A Perfect Storm came from, and maybe starting as a writer in that exercise of being able to give voice to someone or recount a situation that ultimately would lead you to where you were going to go and your war reporting.
Yeah, so for most of, again, I studied anthropology in college, and for most of human history, the people that one depended on for survival were known to us, right? I mean, humans lived in groups of 30, 40, 50 people, maybe 100, maybe 150 people. This group right here looks like we're about around 250 or something like it. But there's that sort of order of magnitude, right? So, the hunter, the shaman, the person who knows about herbal medicine, the midwife, these are all people that we would all know individually. And modern society, it's a mass industrial, highly technological society, which, I don't have to list the blessings of that. We all know, and we all enjoy those blessings. I'm alive because of Western technology and Western medicines. But there is something lost, right? I mean, no one in this room knows any of the, mostly men, I'm guessing, who built this rum, right? I mean, who are they? We have no idea, right? The food we're eating, that disconnect, I think on some unconscious level, was sort of unsettling to people. And so I had this idea that maybe I'll write a book about the jobs, the dangerous jobs. Of course, all jobs are important. School teachers, God forbid we lose the school teachers, et cetera. But the dangerous jobs that get people killed regularly, and just statistically, they're mostly young working class males who are disproportionately affected by this. What are those jobs that we're drilling for oil and commercial diving and logging and commercial fishing? I threw war reporter in there because I feel like reporting on world events actually is kind of vital, not quite in the same way as logging or fishing, which are things we consume and we need, but it's essential to the running of a fair society, of a fair world, that we have good information about our collective failures around the globe. So that was what got me thinking about, let's wake people up to these professions. And So I went, there was a civil war in Bosnia in the early 90s. And I was living in the town of Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is a wonderful fishing town north of Boston. The fishing boat that I wrote about was from Gloucester. The town got whacked by this huge storm. At the time, I was limping around with my chainsaw wound, and it was slowly healing. And so the woman I was living with, she dumped me, and I have sort of had nowhere to go. And I was like, I'm going to go to Bosnia, right? I'm going to show her like the weird male response to heartbreak, right? I'm going to go to a war zone. That'll show her, right? So off I went, and of course, there were a lot of freelancers, and I would say 3/4 of the male freelancers had just been dumped by their girlfriend. So I was definitely part of a trend, right? And but I learned how to, I was plankton in the food chain of journalism, but I learned how to be a war reporter. I was in Sarajevo during the siege, and I filed radio reports, and I think they paid $30 a spot, right? I was never gonna like make a living at this, but it was like going to journalism school. And I was in a war. I was in a war just like the kinds of wars my father had fled. He grew up in Spain, and his family left when the fascists came in 36 under Franco, and then they went to France. His father was Jewish, and they, of course, left when the Germans came into France. So that got me going on war reporting, and I remember I was in Zagreb, and there was no email or anything back then, right? And so, or cell phones, and a fax came into the apartment I was staying in, saying, "You've got," from my agent. By some miracle, I had an agent, and I'd written a proposal for The Perfect Storm, and this fax came in and said, "You got to come home. I sold your book." And I knew it was going to take 2 or 3 years to write this book. I could just tell because there was so much research. He said, "I sold your book for $30,000. So I was like, oh my God, that's $10,000 a year. Like, I'm not going to be able to do this. So I kept doing tree work the whole time, of course, and slowly wrote The Perfect Storm. And then it came out and my life changed.
Was that a challenge to maybe change how your brain was thinking from being in these war zones to now going back and having to write, a fiction novel, or perhaps not?
Yeah, and for the record, it's all reporting. So if I were a better writer, I would be able to write like a proper novel fiction about something that I don't know much about, which is commercial fishing, but I'm not. So it really was reported, and it was a difficult book to write because, of course, the boat disappeared. And I had to stick to the facts and journalistic process. And how do you do that? And I figured out a way that, I stand on the shoulders of other great writers, and I figured out a way because of another book that I read where someone successfully did that as a journalist. But yeah, I came back from Sarajevo, and everything felt flat and dull and not worth living for. And I got my first insight into what humans need, which is they need a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of sort of higher purpose, and to be needed in a community and to be confident that the community will take care of you, tribe, basically. And that's what Sarajevo had. And 1/5 of the city was killed or wounded during the siege, right? The Serbs were shooting people like fish in a barrel. Men, women, children, everybody. But what they did have is this incredibly close human experience that revolved around survival and defending their city from fascists, basically. And so when I came back, it just seemed everything seemed too easy. I'm like, wow, I want that closeness of Sarajevo where everything was important, right? There's sort of an intoxication of authenticity and importance, and I missed it. And I filed that away, and then later, much, much later, when I was with American forces, and then they struggled when they came home, as did I. And no one could figure it out. So many guys in the platoon I was with said, boy, we were at an outpost called Restrepo, which was named after the platoon medic who'd been killed at the base of the hill that Restrepo was on, and Restrepo was about half the size of this room. It was a very small outpost, and we got hit all the time, right? Like every day sometimes we got hit. And a lot of them, when they got back to their base in Italy, in Vicenza, Italy, a lot of these guys that I knew really, really well, I'd been with off and on for a year, they'd almost lower their voice and they say, wow, it's so weird. Like, we all want to go back to Restrepo. One guy said, if you would send a helicopter and say that helicopters going back to Restrepo for another year, we would do it. We would get on. And then I remembered Sarajevo. And then I started thinking about what is it that humans really need above all, above everything else. They need connection. And this society, which is taking care of all of our survival needs, because all that's taken care of, we actually don't need to stick together to survive, right? We know, I mean, we all in this room know we're going to get food tomorrow, we're going to shelter, you know, whatever. Very rare circumstances like hurricanes, like is our survival in question. And so we lose that sense of purpose and community, and which is a great liberation, right? And it's also something's gone missing in our experience as humans, and that's what, you know. So that's what I write about.
I guess natural question I have is going back to your time in Restrepo is how does it get approved? Who approves that? How do you get in there and it just the nature of getting from A to B, and then once you're there, what you're thinking about, or you're just documenting what's going on? Maybe take us through that a little bit.
So I assume you mean how a journalist gets approved for an embed like that,
right?
Yeah, I mean, most of the wars that I covered, the U.S. military wasn't involved, and so it was a matter of flying into Freetown, Sierra Leone during the Civil War, or Monrovia in Liberia, or what have you. Kabul in the 90s. I got to Kabul right as the Taliban were taking over, and that was quite something. But when the U.S. military is involved, as in Afghanistan, they, starting with George Bush, I think, there was an embed program, and I think what Bush was thinking was that the action in Iraq is going to be wildly successful, but no one will know if the press isn't there. Like, what do we do? You know, how do we bring the press along with this thing to show the world that we done good? And I had my problems with that war, but what it did give the world and the U.S. and the press corps is the idea of embedded journalists. So before that, the military was like, no, you can go to the daily press conference, but you're not going anywhere near the front lines, and forget about sitting on a tank, like that, none of that. And it all changed in 2003. And so it's very easy. Like I applied to the Pentagon press office, and I got bumped to the public affairs office at Bagram Air Base, where the American operation was sort of centered. And I flew into Kabul, took a taxi, got into the base, and was assigned. I sort of requested a combat unit, and like the more out there, the better. And they were like, "Oh, the Korengal is sort of popping off right now. How about the 173rd Airborne?" I was like, "That sounds, as long as I don't have to jump out of an airplane, as long as they're already on the ground, like that's good." And they sent me out there, and it was, just instantly an enormous amount of combat. And then they forgot I was there. Honestly, I think if the sort of the higher ups had known that two journalists had video cameras and were going to be at a tiny outpost in a huge amount of combat, off and on for an entire year, like they might not have been that psyched. But they sort of didn't know. And the press, newspapers, they have very little money. They can't afford to have people out in the field for weeks at a time. But I was working for Vanity Fair and ABC News, and once we got to Restrepo, there was, you couldn't spend any money, right? You just ate MREs and did everything the soldiers did. So we would stay there for weeks at a time, right? Tim and I, and so we really got an entire deployment on our cameras, and then Restrepo came out, and I think the command stiffened a little bit. I think they were like, "Oh dear, like this is pretty real, this is pretty raw." But at the end of the day, I think they saw it as also a tribute, because we were totally neutral, right? No politics. We were just we weren't for or against the war. We were just reporting what it feels like to fight as an American soldier at a small outpost. And so I think they sort of realized that we sort of honored the effort of these young men.
How did it feel like to fight like an American soldier in a small outpost? I mean, the fighting obviously is intense, as we've seen in the short clip, but describe it.
So these are really tough guys, right? Like, and they made the first string of the football team, right? I mean, they wanted to be combat infantry. They had to go to great lengths to pass all the tests to be in the 173rd Airborne. And they're enormously enthused. They were enormously enthused about the idea that everything that they learned would be put into use into an actual war zone. Just like their father in Vietnam, their grandfather in World War II, et cetera. I mean, a lot of these guys are from family, and it was all men out there. A lot of these guys are from family, have a real martial tradition going back generations for some of them. And again, they had a version of my question: how do you turn into a man without facing adversity and danger and hardship? And this was their answer. And they all felt incredibly lucky to be. I know this is going to sound weird, but really lucky to be born in a generation when there was a war to fight. Like, they really, like, wow, we lucked out, right? And and they were really good at it. And the losses, the tragedies of losing their brothers, of course, is absolutely devastating. But combat itself, it's very choreographed. It's like a football game, right? I mean, that squad moves left, that squad moves right. They bound from position to position. One squad lays down covering fire while the next one advances, and then, there's a whole choreography to it, and it can get very chaotic and crazy, and particularly when you're first hit, like the first moments when you're ambushed, like sort of, it's all, your brain goes into blur mode, and things would blur, and I wouldn't hear anything, like your hearing drops out. Things get very blurry, and then you chunk into like this incredible focus after a few moments. That's how it happened to me. And then time goes kind of slowly, and you're capable of enormous concentration, which is good if you're shooting a rifle or running a camera like I was. One time, I sort of like went blank. I sort of froze. We got hit very suddenly, and my camera and bulletproof vest was like right over there. And I couldn't get to it because there was so much gunfire coming in between me and it. And I was sort of paralyzed for a moment. And then I snapped out of it. I was paralyzed because I didn't have anything to do. I didn't have my camera, right? If you got something to do, or I imagine in other circumstances, if you're with your child, you have to protect your child or whatever. Like, if you've got a mission, you're good. If you're just empty-handed and have nothing to do, you're worried about yourself, and that's paralyzing. And one of the ways that soldiers really get through this, of course, military training is incredible, right? But also there's a kind of hardwired response. Oh, I'm part of this group. The group needs me. I need it. Like, I'm not even thinking about myself. It really is analogous to parents with a child who might be in danger. Like, they're not thinking about themselves. The house is on fire. You know what I mean? Like, I got to get my kids out of here. And that's enormously helpful in dealing with the fear in combat.
It sounds like it's, at least we're moving towards a conversation about teamwork, about being able to count on the person to your right, the person to your left. Maybe just that, and let's perhaps begin to relate it to this group, to their teams. Yeah. It might be difficult, right? But I think that's an important thing to talk about.
So the more danger you're in, the more naturally and quickly people will affiliate in groups, survival groups. And I know there was a pretty terrible hurricane that hit here a couple of years ago, right? And I imagine that these communities, I don't know any of the details, but typically in a natural disaster like that, people come together very, very quickly, and they need water, they need food, they need safety, they need to get the children safe. There are all these very core human concerns that have been human concerns for hundreds of thousands of years that are now sort of absent from our daily thinking. All of a sudden, they're back in our daily thinking, and people affiliate very, very naturally and very well. In minutes, almost. It happened. I live in New York City. It happened after 9/11 in New York City, and it's an adaptive response. And one of the wonderful things about it is that it's quite egalitarian. So you might be rich or you might be poor or whatever. All these divisions that we have in society, they're all rendered irrelevant by the fact that sort of we need each other. And I think you can replicate in that business in the business world fairly well. But that basic equality, people really, really like it. In fact, they like it so much that they'll accept a certain amount of hardship in order to get it. And there was, in my book Tribe, I wrote about an earthquake in Italy, in Avezzano, Italy in 1915, I think it was, something like that. 95% of the population was killed in under a minute, right? It was like they'd been hit by a nuclear bomb. And the people that survived it, they had to make it for days on their own before help could get there. And one man who wrote about it said that the earthquake produced what the law promises, but cannot in fact deliver, which is the equality of all people. And then that sort of dissipates. You know, in New York, we didn't see race, we didn't see income, we didn't see anything after 9/11, right? I mean, we're just like, oh, we're here, we're alive, what can we do? And so, you know, can you, without the life and death stakes, of course, can you pick that up and bring it and put it down in an environment where we're actually not in danger, we are trying to do something great, something grand in the world of business or world of anything. Like, can you do that? And you can, but you have to sort of, I mean, you'll do it naturally if you're hit by a hurricane, right? You have to sort of do it deliberately. You have to take steps to make it happen if it's an environment like this. And there's huge rewards for making it happen. Not only is it a more compassionate, humane, wonderful work environment, but I'm guessing you'll do better, right? And so as one of the guys in the platoon said to me, just in amazement, he said, you know, there's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other, but we would all die for each other, right? So one of the great things about this sort of tribal ethos is that it actually doesn't depend on this extremely delicate variable thing, which is how we actually all feel, right? God forbid it comes down to our feelings, right? Because those change all the time, right? You know, one glance from someone that where you feel judged, and suddenly they're your enemy, and that, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It all falls apart. It can't be that way, right? There has to be this sort of overriding purpose where, you know, we're all in this. We're all sort of brothers and sisters in the fight, and we'll work out our personal problems on the sidelines later, but it won't have anything to do with this big endeavor. And so, yeah, I mean, we can talk about it. You can produce that, but you have to do it quite deliberately.
Well, and I think, you know, as you mentioned, Tribe and sort of what that narrative talks about is a couple very interesting conclusions. Is that when someone is in that situation, and I think you even talked about the Revolutionary War and soldiers that were captured or held captive by different groups, that they got the feeling that when they got back to their regular lives that they wanted to go back.
Yeah, so there's a phenomenon that Benjamin Franklin and some others of the era wrote about along the frontier, where people on the leading edge of the frontier, where they sort of like interfaced with native territory, right? In Western Pennsylvania, where on my mother's side, my ancestors were from, that either the young people would sort of run off and join the native tribes, particularly the young men. I mean, the sexual mores of sort of early Christian society on the frontier were like pretty oppressive. And can you imagine being behind a plow horse all day long? Like brutal. And then the native peoples, they lived off hunting and some planting. Morally, it was a much more natural, free environment. And there wasn't this sort of fierce Christian God that was like penalizing human behavior. So for these young men particularly, this was it's just like, wow, I want more of that. And so they kept leaving, right? And as Franklin said, it's just strange that it never goes the other way, right? It's the tribal peoples are never coming to our towns and communities. It's our young people keep fleeing, and even young people who were kidnapped during raids along the frontier and brought back into native society and adopted into the tribe, even if they were given the chance of being repatriated, many of them would refuse. And some during peace treaties between the Shawnee and the colonial authorities, the part of the treaty would be you have to return all the prisoners, right? You have to return all the adopted you're adopted prisoners to our society, right? And the young people who had been kidnapped had to be tied by the wrists and tied onto horses and forcibly repatriated back to white society. And it's totally extraordinary. So when I was thinking about American soldiers, I just thought, oh, of course, it's tribal out there. It plays to all of our human virtues, our human values, these sort of ancient human norms. And this is not, modern American society, again, as wonderful as it is, and it truly is wonderful, right? What Western society has produced, what this world has produced, is totally extraordinary, right? The medicine, the knowledge, the sort of legal frameworks for individual rights, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can go on, you can talk about it for hours. But it does not have the sense of tribe, and that's just one thing that we all kind of yearn for. And people that go through a catastrophe and survive it often look back on those difficult days with real nostalgia. I have friends along the Mississippi coastline who remember with enormous nostalgia the aftermath of Katrina. And the people in London, I just came from London a couple of days ago, people in London during the Blitz, they rallied around in the same way that was sort of relatively classless, right, to survive the Blitz. 30,000 people died in the rubble from German bombings, right? And afterwards, people missed it. And one of the reasons is that they did extraordinarily well psychologically during the Blitz. One government official said, in amazement, they were expecting mass psychiatric casualties, and this one government official said, in amazement, he said, we have the chronic neurotics of peacetime driving ambulances during air raids. Like, it just stunned everyone because admissions to psych wards went down during the Blitz. One woman who was interviewed in an oral history, I didn't know this, the Thames River has beaches on it at low tide, like who knew, right? But, so I didn't understand that, but she said, she said, had the Germans invaded, had they actually invaded England, we would have all, this is a middle-aged lady, right? We would have all gone down to the beaches with broken bottles to fight them if we'd had to. Like, that's tribe. If you can take that, like down to the beaches with broken bottles and transfer it to the corporate world or any world at all, you'll do extremely well.
Yeah, it's almost not almost, it is a sense of shared struggle, right?
Yeah.
And I think you take that in the direction of what everyone in the world went through with COVID and the immense mental health issues that have come out of that when you're alone in a silo and completely devoid of, number one, people who you identify with, and number two, people who you struggle with that you got to get through the hard times with and still be able to show up the next day. That's in a nutshell what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And COVID was particularly tragic because it actually, because of the health concerns, it actually forced people to actually not be physically close to each other. And so we had to collectively do something that was quite hard, which is to isolate, right? I mean, to collectively isolate it's like an oxymoron, right? I mean, so how do you do that? All of our instincts at funerals, at weddings, we hold each other, we clutch each other, we get close together. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, 2 little girls, and my 7-year-old, someone asked me recently, what was I most proud of in my life? And I came to fatherhood late. I'm no longer a war reporter, and I adore being a father and having a family. And so my daughter, as you all the parents in the room know this, like, she'll get upset, and sometimes she'll just like spin out, like she just will lose control, like almost like she's having her body, like, and she can't regulate herself, and we all know what that looks like. And I'm really good at sort of like holding her and talking to her, and she clutches me like a little animal, right? And it's the best feeling I've ever had, right? That I can do that I can calm her down in a few seconds, in a minute. I couldn't do it without touching her, right? I mean, it's the touch that works, right? We all know how this works, right? So what COVID was absolutely tragic because it meant we cannot touch each other. We cannot get close to each other. And the psychological stress of that, and I'm sorry, you know, Zoom, like whatever, like none of that, that just clearly doesn't, it's not a real substitute for the real thing. And of course, mental health, unlike during the Blitz in London, mental health crashed in this country during COVID, right? It didn't improve the way it did in London when they were getting bombed, right? It actually, people were under enormous stress, a lot of drinking, a lot of sort of, you know, really dangerous behaviors.
Let's talk about freedom, maybe moving a little bit further ahead
Yeah.
in the lineage of the things that you've written and produced, and maybe just how prior experience kind of shaped and brought you to finding out what that word means and
Yeah.
what the exercise was to find it.
Yeah, so I was asked to write a book about freedom and what that means to people. And of course, it can easily sort of derail into a heated political argument, which I wasn't interested in doing, right? But freedom, in, you know, basic human terms, it means that a smaller group can maintain its autonomy, its dignity, its ability to be self-determining from a more powerful group that wants to control it, right? And humans are the only species, the only one, including all of the primates. I mean, we're social primates, but we're the only species where a smaller individual can outfight, can defeat in a one-on-one contest a larger individual. It's just not true in the rest of the animal kingdom. And likewise, a smaller group can defeat a larger one. We're also the only species where an adult will give their life, and men are particularly prone to this in combat. An adult will give his life defending a same-sex peer. It makes complete biological sense that you would die protecting your children, maybe your spouse. But what, you know, in Darwinian terms, in evolutionary terms, where's the advantage to die, throwing yourself on the hand grenade to protect all the other guys in the bunker that you're not related to, who are all going to go on to have children, and you won't? Like, how does Darwin explain that behavior? It's difficult, right? And so we are the only species that does that. And one of the reasons we have autonomy and freedom is that groups of people, we're seeing this in Ukraine right now, who are absolutely dedicated to the freedom of their group, right? I'm going to die fighting the Russians. Hopefully I won't, but if I do, that's okay because I'm dying to protect my group from being oppressed, right? And because of that unique human propensity for defending liberty, the freedom of their people and their own dignity from an oppressor, because of that, freedom exists in the world. And so I wrote a short book called Freedom about how that works. Like, why are we this exception? And it's divided into 3 sections: run, fight, think.
Sounds like a day in hospitality, right?
Yes, right. So basically, your first, you know, if your freedom is being threatened, evading the more powerful force is the best first course of action. The Apache did this extremely well in the American Southwest. They remained free for 300 years, whereas the sedentary Hopi and the Zuni and the other Pueblo tribes were rolled by the Spanish almost immediately. And then if that doesn't work, fight. And for some of the reasons I talked about, smaller groups often defeat larger ones. I mean, look, Taliban outlasted us in Afghanistan, right? I mean, eventually, not that we couldn't have stayed, but we chose not to because it was just too costly for us. And they weren't, you know, we're not going anywhere, right? We don't have shoes, we don't have we don't have an air force, but we're going to stay. And then finally, you have to, if those things don't work, outthink your adversary. And I looked at the labor movement in this country, and about 100 years ago, and there was, I mean, I'll end with this because it's such a wonderful quote. The labor movement was completely outgunned by the U.S. government and the sort of corporate powers and the National Guard, right? So they'd have strikes in the textile mills in Massachusetts, and like around 1920 or so, 1912, and they're totally outgunned, right? Outgunned. It didn't work, and then they started putting women into the front lines of these protests and these strikes. And what I found with these groups that overcome a superior force, one of the crucial components is involving women in the fight. You need leaders who are willing to die, and you need to involve women. And so this one police captain said in frustration, because once the women were in the front line, it changed the dynamic, and the strikers started to win, and they actually won in this one particular case in 1912. And this one police captain said in frustration, he said, one cop can handle 10 men, but it takes 10 cops to handle one woman. And that changed everything. Yeah, so.
Let that sink in, right? The book that's on the table, your newest work, certainly, going back to the chainsaw incident, describing dangerous jobs, really experiencing dangerous jobs as a war correspondent, and then all of a sudden, in your driveway, you have a medical emergency, and here we are.
Yeah, so 4 years ago, coming right up on June 16th, 4 years ago, during COVID, we were living on a property, my family and I were living on a remote property in Massachusetts at the end of a dead-end dirt road, surrounded by a large area of government land, forest. No cell phone service. The landlines didn't work when it rained because they would short out. And beautiful, remote, gorgeous place. And a 1 hour transport time to the nearest hospital. But I never thought about that because I'm a healthy guy, right? I mean, I'm not a walking heart attack. Like, I have none of the things that drop middle-aged men in their tracks. A few years ago, me and a couple of buddies from Restrepo walked. I don't know where I got this idea from, and I don't know why these guys followed me and did it, but we walked from along the railroad lines from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. And railroad lines are interesting because it goes right through everything. Ghettos, factories, farmland, wilderness, it cuts right through everything. And there's sort of these swaths of no man's land. It's totally illegal to walk on there, but the advantage of that is there's no one there, right? And so, if you can sort of stay a little bit ahead of the police, if you can stay out of sight, like, you're good. And we get our water out of creeks, and we were sleeping under bridges and abandoned buildings, and we, walked 400 miles carrying pretty heavy loads, right? And so I physically, I just felt like, okay, someone's going to get me eventually, but when I wake up in the morning, I'm pretty sure I'll make it till dinner time, right? I'll just put it that way. And that's not necessarily true. And it's not true for any of us in this room. It's not true for anybody. We never know that this won't be our last day, right? Probably not. Hopefully not, but we don't know. And if you think about it, thinking that there's a guarantee that you'll live allows for us to not properly appreciate this just incredible fact that we're alive and conscious on this planet, right? Just on some level, like, oh my God, are you kidding? Like, I'm here, we're all here. Like, and we forget to appreciate that because we're busy with our lives, right? Like, I get it. But if you can just think in terms of, like, I don't know that this won't be my last day. So who would I want to be on my last day if I knew somehow tomorrow morning at dawn they're going to come shoot me? Like, who would I want to be? Would I be loving to the people I love, respectful to others? Would I stop and just gawk in amazement at what a tree looks like? Yeah, probably. I would do all those things, right? So, like, then be that person today, just in case, right? So that's my little sort of lesson from. But what happened to me was one afternoon, I was talking to my wife. We were in a sort of a cabin in the woods that was even remote from the house, right, down a trail that I'd built. And we had a little bit of babysitting, and we went out there and for a couple of hours, and in mid-sentence, this pain shot through my abdomen. And not unbearable, but definitely like it got my attention, like what is that? And I tried to shift and make it go away, and it wouldn't go away, and I stood up and I almost fell down. My blood pressure was tanking. I didn't know that I'd had an undiagnosed aneurysm in my pancreatic artery, which is the little artery that nobody needs to ever think about practically. And an aneurysm is an unnatural ballooning in the artery from a weak spot or something like that. It's not a function of, poor health or a lifetime of sin, right? I mean, it's just like an anatomical problem. It's quite random. And it had chosen that moment, having been there probably my entire life, growing and growing and growing, it chose that moment to rupture. And I was suddenly losing a unit of blood every 10 or 15 minutes into my own abdomen, right? So if you're stabbed in the stomach and you sever an artery, first of all, everyone knows what the problem is. Secondly, the doctors know where to sort of put their finger to stop the leak, right? Not with internal hemorrhage. It's absolutely deadly because they have a hard time finding it. And there's 10 units of blood in the human body. I was losing a unit every 10 or 15 minutes. There's a 1-hour transport time to the hospital. Like I was basically a human hourglass. Once you lost half your blood, 2/3 of your blood, there's almost no getting you back, even if they pump you full of blood. For some chemical reasons in your blood, it's extremely dangerous. And so I got to the hospital minutes from, probably 10 or 15 minutes from being dead, right? And I was still conscious. And I was a runner when I was young, and I'm very physically active. I got a good heart. I was fighting, right? I had no idea I was dying, absolutely none, right? But I was fighting, and my body knew. And they rushed me into the trauma bay, and a doctor. Now, I should say I'm an atheist, I'm a rationalist. My father was a physicist and an atheist, just as background for what I'm about to tell you. The doctor had a big needle, and he asked permission, and I said yes, to put it through my neck into my jugular to transfuse me, because that's the fastest way of getting a lot of blood into you. And while he was prepping the area and getting
You're awake.
Oh yeah, I'm conscious. Yeah. I'm not quite of right mind, right? I mean, it was like akin to being incredibly drunk, right? I mean, I'm here, but things aren't I'm having trouble connecting the dots here, right? And when the doctor asked permission to put the needle in my neck, I said, "You mean in case there's an emergency?" Like that was my response to him, right? And so he started prepping the area and whatever he was. And I'm lying on the bed in the trauma bay, and all of a sudden, below me to my left, I'm become aware of this black void, this black abyss that opens up underneath me. It's like infinitely dark and huge, and I'm getting pulled into it. And I don't know that I'm dying. I had no idea. But I know I don't want to go into the infinitely black abyss, right? You just sort of, my animal sense, I was like a gut-shot coyote, right? I was just like, all instinct, right? I was like, don't go into the abyss, and because you're not coming back. I kind of intuited that. But I was getting pulled in, and I started to panic. And then my dead father, who'd been dead 8 years at that point, appeared above me to my left, in this sort of intense sort of energy form, right? It wasn't like I wouldn't even say that I saw him the way we use the word in ordinary life, like I see you, like his presence was there in this very, very intense form. And he communicated to me, basically, it's okay, you don't have to fight it. Come with me, I'll take care of you. I was horrified, right? I mean, first of all, I was like, Dad? Like, what are you doing here? What's happening? And then go with you, you're dead. I'm not going with you, I'm alive. We have nothing to talk about, right? Like, we'll talk later, a lot later, I'm sure, but this is not happening, right? And I said to the doctor, you gotta hurry, I'm going. And I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was going. And long story short, they got enough blood in me, I stabilized. They got me into the IR suite, interventional radiology suite. They put me on a fluoroscope, which is basically an X-ray video. And to the doctor, the interventional radiologist was able to thread a catheter from my groin up through my abdomen, through my vascular system, and then another through my left wrist eventually. And they managed to get it after 6 hours. And I'm conscious for all this. My vitals were too low to give me morphine or anything. So I'm tracking all of this, and I was in absolute agony. I was in incredible pain in my back. And eventually, they saved my life. But barely. Like, it was really, really close. And even once I got to the IR suite, they had trouble getting the catheter to the bleed, and they couldn't do it. I remember at one point the doctors looking at each other like, well, we tried, right? Which was kind of horrifying to see. And that was the first time I realized what the stakes were. Like, oh my God, I might not make it. Like, I didn't realize. And
that was after the table incident, right? This is hours later.
Yeah, it's hours later. But I finally realized, like, oh my God, I might die, right? And the alternative, if he had failed, would be send me into surgery, open my abdomen up, and basically root around and like try to find the leak, the bleed before I bled out, right? And the odds of surviving that are like pretty low. So they did it, they pulled it off, and I woke up in the ICU the next morning to the ICU nurse saying, congratulations, you almost died. Like, no one can believe you're alive. And I was like, almost died? Are you kidding? Like, I came in for belly pain. What are you talking about? And when she came back, I'll end with this, when she came back an hour later, she said, how are you doing? And I'm throwing up blood, I'm in agony, I can barely lift my head, I'm a mess, right? I said, I'm okay, but what you told me is really terrifying, it's really disturbing. I can't stop thinking about it. And she said, try this, instead of thinking about it like something scary, try thinking about it like something sacred. Like that I'd had a sacred experience. And again, I'm an atheist, but the word sacred is a great word that has very powerful secular meanings. And so I've been thinking about that ever since. And my book writes to that thought that she gave me. Like, I'd been going to front lines my whole life and coming back with information that I hope allows us to run the world better, right? And I know that sounds grandiose, but that's what journalists sort of believe. Like, if no one gets the information, like, we can't make good decisions. And it's like, all right, I stopped war reporting after my buddy got killed, and the front lines came to me. I went to the ultimate front line, I looked over the edge into the abyss. What did I see? What did I learn there that is sacred in the sense, for me, sacred means anything that helps people live more dignified lives with less pain, with more love, more connection. Anything that does that is a sacred process, right? And so what did I come back from the abyss with? What knowledge that might help me and other people get through not only life, which is hard enough, but then facing their own mortality. That's tough, right? But there's ways to do it. Like, what did I learn? And that's what my book's about.
Holy cow. Maybe just a final thought, because there's a ton in what we discussed today before we're opening up for Q&A. And I think that's probably what you just said in your last statement, right? Like, how do we, as men and women, right, husbands and fathers, bosses, co-workers, whatever, try and have that thought in the front of our minds about certainly the sanctity of life and those big things, but how to make each day better and appreciate it and not get caught up in the tough things that don't matter and try to focus on the good things that do.
Right. Well, the trick is to have this sort of dual track thing going on. On the one hand, you do have to engage very vigorously with the sort of minutia of life, right? I mean, you don't get your check to the insurance company, suddenly your car's not insured, you have an accident, et cetera, right? I mean, you got to deal with that stuff, right? And if you don't, your life you're going to have a lot of problems, right, in your life. But what you don't want to do is become so focused on that stuff, and of course the intoxicating, details of an ambitious career, right? You don't want to get so focused on that you forget to be amazed at your existence and the existence of other people you love and your children and the fact that there are trees, among other things, right? I mean, whatever, the list is endless of like what we could be amazed by. And so you want to be able to sort of like have both going on at the same time. And some people use religion to get there, which is awesome, right? I mean, I'm all for it. But you don't actually need religion to get there. You can just wake up. And I was woken up by almost dying. I'd been almost killed in war zones many times. It didn't do it. It had to be like that experience, particularly having children. And I read a incredible account. It's not in my book, but of something that happened to the Russian writer Dostoevsky. So when he was in his 20s, before he was a famous writer, he was sort of a political firebrand and kind of radical, and he and his buddies would sit around talk. This was in the 1840s, sit around talking about sort of outrageous things like liberating the serfs and things like that, right? And which was not appreciated by the Tsar Nicholas I and his police. And so they picked him up. They picked him and his buddies up. They had like a circle, a political circle there. We get together and talk about stuff. They picked them all up, arrested them, threw them in jail for 8 months. Not a particularly serious crime, so they weren't that worried about it, right? And then finally, after 8 months, they were called from their cells and put in a wagon. And they assumed being driven to the court to be discharged, reunited with their families, whatever. And to their horror, the cart stopped at a city square, and all of them were tied to posts, and a firing squad was lined up in front of them. And the soldiers charged their rifles and raised them and waited for the command to fire. And it was all theater. The men didn't know this. It was all theater. And at the last moment, bracing for the impact, right? A rider cantered into the square and said, "The Tsar forgives them," right? 2 of the men in that group went insane. The rest of their lives, they were insane. Dostoevsky was not. And what we know from his what was he thinking in those final moments? We all want to know, right? Like, you're about to die. What does the world look like? What kind of hallucinatory vision are we having in those moments if we're unfortunate enough to land in them? And so what he said is really instructive, I think, about it's a lens through which we can look at the world with the understanding that that we might be wrenched from it. Like, what's the world look like if we don't take it for granted? This is what it looks like. He was standing there and he saw sunlight glinting off the roof of a church, and it happened to be a church steeple. And he thought, in moments, I'm going to be part of the sunlight. I'm going to be part of all things. I'm going to join all things. And indeed, we are part of all things, right? I mean, even just on a molecular level, we are part of all things. Indeed, he was right. And spiritually, of course, as well. And then he thought, if I should somehow survive, which he did, if I should somehow survive, I will turn every moment into an infinity. And of course, you can't do that all day long or you won't get the dishes done. But he had an awareness of like, okay, stop, like, wow, here I am, appreciate it, like, worship it perhaps, like, and then go on with your life. So what I wound up with is the ability to do that. And if I'm on the runaway train of a bad mood, or I'm frustrated with my kids, or whatever, like that whole thing that we all are familiar with, like, I'm very good now at sort of pulling the emergency brake. Like, you don't want to ride this train to the last station, right? Like, you can get off it right now. Like, come on, grow up. You're alive. You're lucky to be alive. Just stop, right? And that's quite a good exercise. And I don't know if you have traffic around here. We have a lot of traffic in New York, where I'm from. One of the most frustrating things you can be in is in a traffic jam, right? Like, you need to get somewhere to a meeting or to the beach or whatever, and you can't because there's this conspiracy that's keeping you stuck going like 1 mile an hour down the freeway. And what do we do with that? And so I came up with this trick that I'll share with you for like calming yourself down. And what I tell myself is, hey, relax, you're traffic too. Like you're traffic for the guy behind you, and he's traffic for the guy behind him. We're all part of this. This isn't a conspiracy, right, aimed at you, right? We are all part of this. We're all part of the solution. Just relax. And it actually literally saying out loud, relax, you're traffic too, literally it will lower your heart rate. Like try it. It's pretty amazing.
Great advice. Any questions from anyone? Beth and Cherry have microphones?
We both have them.
Go ahead, Paul.
Right, hold on, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Have I moved closer to a hospital? You know, for a couple of years, I was actually quite paranoid, medically paranoid, and this thing came out of the blue. I was sure I could get another aneurysm. They take decades or years to develop, so you don't get them overnight. But I was just positive that there's another one in there, and it was going to rupture. And you know, had I been stuck in traffic, had I been on an airplane flight, had I been camping with my kids, I would have died. Right? So I became very aware of that, and it took a couple of years to actually stop being really, really anxious. So no, I haven't moved closer to a hospital. I live in New York City, you know, with some amazing medical care, but it's a fair question, and I gave a lot of thought to it.
I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just curious, with the experience that you went through with your father, did that change your thinking as an atheist?
No, didn't. No, I'll tell you why. So it raised, for me, believing in God is an active thing, right? Like, and it comes from within, and I don't think you can actually just make an executive decision to do it. It's like falling in love. Like you can't just decide to fall in love with someone. I mean, you could marry them, right? But you can't decide to fall in love. And if you're not in love with God, as I understand the religious sentiment, right, you're not really religious. And I don't feel it, right? And I have enormous reverence for the natural world and for life and my family, which I think religion can help people get to those feelings. And I just like, I got there on my own, right? And so, but that's different from what people call the afterlife, right? I mean, what I saw with my father, and you know, you could have a creator God that created the universe, which is its own miracle, right? Like the cosmologists say that the universe went from not existing to hundreds of millions of light years across in an amount of time during the Big Bang, in an amount of time too small to measure, right? You could have a creator God, if you will, that did that and just decided, you know what, I'm going to have biological beings in this universe, kangaroos and turtles and humans and whatever. And when they're dead, they're dead. Like, that's it. They're biological and they will decompose and that's it. There's no spirit that lives on. Or you could have a completely mechanistic universe that was produced by a massive quantum fluctuation that produced the Big Bang, which is the secular theory for how this whole thing got started, where there is some kind of post-death existence that we just don't understand, like at the quantum level, like at the subatomic level, like that we just don't understand and probably never will. And in my book, I say, you know, we might understand reality the way a dog understands a television screen. Like absolutely no way to conceive of the larger reality around it that is producing these images that we see. And one of the key things, according to the physicists, is consciousness. It radically changes consciousness. Conscious observation radically changes the behavior of subatomic particles, right? And we have no idea why, but if you watch a subatomic particle, it will act differently than if you don't watch it. And they could prove that, and they have no idea why. And so one of the theories is that consciousness is actually part of the universe, part of the material universe, the way gravity is. And it wouldn't exist without consciousness. And there might even be a consciousness particle, like the Higgs boson is the particle associated with gravity. I mean, they just don't know. So you could have a God and no afterlife. You could have an afterlife and no God, an afterlife in the sense that in the quantum sense that I'm talking about. You could have neither, you could have both. what my father, experiencing my father woke up in me is the idea that at the end of the day, the thing that we're all experiencing, which is life and consciousness, we just have no idea quite how it works. Like in rational scientific terms, we have no idea how it really works.
First of all, thank you for being here, and we appreciate sharing all your life experiences. My question was, how much has your perspective on life changed, and what's been the recovery upon learnings of your dear friend and colleague Tim Hetherington being killed in Libya? Because it certainly could be you.
Yeah, so I got out of war reporting after my brother and colleague and friend Tim Hetherington, a wonderful British photographer, was killed in Libya in 2011 covering the Libyan civil war. Tim and I made Restrepo together. We were nominated for an Oscar and went to the Oscars in February of 2011. The Arab Spring was in full boil, like in journalistic terms, like surf's up, like get out there. This doesn't happen often. And we had an assignment to cover Egypt and Libya for Vanity Fair. And he went early, and the last moment I couldn't go for personal reasons, and he was killed in the city of Misrata. He was killed in a mortar strike, a mortar fired by Gaddafi's forces on the front line of Misrata, killed along with some other people and many wounded from a wound in his groin that severed his femoral. And he bled out in the back of a rebel pickup truck racing for the Misrata hospital. And after that, I mean, it just wrecked me. And if he died, if poor Tim had died in a car accident, I would have grieved, but I wouldn't have felt guilty. And had I not been in so much combat with Tim, I would have grieved and not felt so guilty. But if you're in combat with someone and they die in combat and you're not there to save them or die instead of them, right? Like my friend Brendan said, there's some guys we straight up hate each other, but we'd all die for each other. When that happens, there's a lifetime of guilt. And I know it's intellectually, like I know it doesn't make sense, but feelings often don't make sense, right? We all know that, and they still affect you. And so after that, I got out of war reporting, mostly because I didn't want to do to everyone who loved me what Tim had just done to everyone who loved him, which was annihilate them, right? And I was like, all right, I'm out. And I thought, I was safe, right? I'm done with the war reporting. And then it turns out, something can rupture in your abdomen, and suddenly you're in a fight for your life. Tim's death. I'll put it this way: a Vietnam vet said to me, "You and Tim." After Tim died, he sent me an email. A guy down in Texas, I can't remember his name. He sent me an email. He said, you and Tim, with your film Restrepo and your book War, like you really got what war is about. You really understood it, but you didn't understand all of it. It's one last thing you didn't understand. He said, you go to war, there's a chance you're going to get killed. You don't know. You'll find out, right? But you're guaranteed to lose your brothers. And Sebastian, you didn't really know what war was about until you lost Tim, and now you know. Like, welcome to the club. And he was absolutely right. And finally, war is a lot of things. It's very exciting, it's very scary, it's very meaningful, it's very profound, it's very nihilistic, it's everything, right? But it's also incredibly sad. And it's easy, sadness is a delicate feeling, it's a fragile feeling, right? It's easily dispersed by fear or excitement or whatever. But if you don't eventually get to the sadness of war, like you don't really know war. You've missed a crucial component of it.
So now that you've become a man, what's next?
Now that I've become a man, what's next? Fatherhood. Yeah, I love being a father. More than everything else combined. I absolutely adore it. And I came to it late, and that's what I'm doing. And I write enough books to pay the bills, but yeah, I'm a dad now.
other book in the works?
No, there's no other books in the works. Like, I don't think ahead very well. My wife will tell you that if I can think about tomorrow, I'm doing good. Like, so, but certainly not the next book. I'm on book tour now, and I was in Dublin yesterday morning, just got here yesterday. I'm heading off on book tour for another couple of weeks. And, every book that I've written, I had no idea beforehand that I was going to write it. Right. So now, and certainly this one, I didn't know beforehand that I was going to write it. So I'll see. I'll see what opportunities life gives me.
Rob, Bruce, pleasure to meet you. Really enjoyed speaking with you. So thanks for being here. To kind of get vulnerable for a second, because I know I'm in a really great crowd here.
Yeah.
As someone who, over the last year into this year, for some reason developed a constant thought of dying, and I kind of transitioned into it. It's like a fear of losing time, right? And so it's always in front of me. I'm always thinking about it, but I've transitioned to think like, all right, take advantage of everything. Roll over, kiss my fiance when I'm too tired, or get up and do that workout, go and have a beer with a friend. But I found myself sometimes taking life too seriously because of that. So what advice do you have for a 29-year-old who is appreciating everything in front of him, but sometimes just needs to chill out and realize.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a difference between activity and sort of reverence, right? I mean reverence in a secular way, right? And so if you're sitting around doing nothing with your life, you're missing out. It's a big, amazing world, right? There's incredible jobs you can do, people you can meet, you can learn a musical instrument, you can go to Asia, you can, whatever. I mean, it's the world, dive in, right? And if you're not doing things, you're not taking advantage of this incredible body and this incredible planet that you were like given for a while. But exactly as you say, if that's all you do, if you're on this sort of treadmill of experiences, you forget to appreciate it, right? And so, what I would just say is like, I don't have a smartphone. I have a flip phone. It's in my pocket. I can prove it to you if you don't believe me. One of the problems in this sort of the attention economy, I think it's been called, like this world that we live in, where industry has figured out how to monetize people's attention spans, right? It's kind of insidious, and they've programmed algorithms into social media that are very, very good at seizing our attention and not letting go. And it's part of this sort of like frenetic, like just you're on the hamster wheel, kind of like go, 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 go. And what I would say is that we all, whether it's being obsessively working out or obsessively checking your email, whatever the obsession is, whatever the addiction is, real freedom and real peace of mind and real profundity lie in both doing things and in not doing things. And what I fear about this society, so my girls aren't allowed any screens at all, like no touch screen, nothing, right? And because I really, particularly for young people, particularly for young girls, like in high school, the data is in, like it's really, really dangerous for them. And what I would say is that in this society, what you have to figure out how to do is nothing. You don't have to sit in the lotus position all day long or anything. I'm not talking about that, right? But just figure out how to like not look, just for starters, not look at your phone. Literally just like look around. Because your phone you could look at anywhere, but you can't look at here anywhere. You can't be in this moment ever again. Right, so just like there's something about boredom and the enhanced sort of like appreciation that comes with boredom, like that is very, very valuable and really important to the human brain. And I got to say, the work that I do is hard. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be able to do it, and it's quite hard. And the hardest thing are these conceptual leaps where I sort of link these ideas. I mean, I can always fill the words in, like a bricklayer, like, okay, here's the wall, I'll fill the bricks in. The words are no problem. But figuring out where to put the walls, how to design the house, that's the conceptual leap. And it only it sort of only comes when I'm doing nothing. Like when I'm in the shower or I'm driving or taking a walk. Like that's when these conceptual leaps come, and it's a very, very rich time. And you need to put your brain in neutral. And if you're looking at your phone, it will not be in neutral. And they can't monetize you being in neutral. They can only monetize you when you're in gear and driving forward. So what I would say is use the phone as the tool that it is. Like we have chainsaws, we have toasters, we have access, whatever. We got lots of tools in the society. They're amazing tools. Use it as the tool it is, but be very conscious that the attention, when it steals your attention, it steals a little bit of your life. And you may not notice, you may be on your phone and then you just miss something your child did. I see it in the playgrounds all the time. Parents are just like, they're completely missing what their children are doing. Like, what are you even a parent for? Like, what are you doing? Like, and I'm just amazed. I'm amazed, right? And I've wound up taking care of other people's kids because they're on their phone and the kid's crying, and I go over like, oh, it's okay, mommy's over there. It's brutal. So that to me, honestly, really, like, is the threat to our society at a kind of personal and almost on a spiritual level.
Sebastian?
Anybody else?
Yeah, anyone else?
With the military, what was one of your lessons you learned from working that close to the military?
Well, I mean, the military, the command structure, I had nothing to do with. Like this platoon was a platoon of young guys, right? And their combat fatigues were in shreds, and often, there are plenty of times at the outpost when we get attacked on a hot day, and they'd all be shirtless in flip-flops fighting, right? So it didn't feel like the military. It felt like a bunch of very tough young guys on a hilltop. And the main thing that I learned, which again is not part of the military, uses this to good effect as well. They should, but the main reality that I saw of the military in combat was just this incredible bond between these young guys that transcended what they felt like with everything, right? And what, all the divisions, all the different divisions in society, you religious or not religious, you black or you white, you rich or you're poor, is your dad in prison or is the president of Harvard? None of that stuff matters, right? And that to me, and not that they wouldn't use those details to make fun of each other, of course they would. Like that's what young men do, is they mock each other in this like hilarious way, which weirdly proves how close they are, right? They'll say something to each other that if you said to someone who didn't love you, you get punched in the face, and then you don't get punched in your face, and you've just proved in this male way that we're really close, right? Like it's a very funny thing that young men do. And so there's a lot of humor around the individual identities, but it's of no consequence in combat. And to me, I felt like as an anthropologist, I was looking at our evolutionary history. I was like, wow, this was how things worked 50,000 years ago, except the group, of course, would have been multiple, like generations, male and female, young children, et cetera. Yeah.
Sebastian, thank you very much. We're blessed to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank